So I think that the future for vaccines is actually a lot more rosy than most people would think. And it's possible. It really is.
Welcome to Let's Talk About Health in Africa, a podcast in which we talk to leaders, practitioners, and change makers about some of the things, some of the work that they are doing to improve healthcare in Africa. It has been such a privilege for me to speak to the amazing women coming out of Africa in today. My next guest is Dr. Alexandra Graham, who is currently the president of LaGray Finance, which provides finance solutions to enterprises in the healthcare and hospitality sector and facilitates acquisition of capital of up to 500 million US dollars. Dr. Graham is the former president of LaGray Chemical Company, which manufactured active pharmaceutical ingredients and finished pharmaceutical products in Ghana, a company that she co-founded with Dr. Paul Lartey. She is a scientist and a pharmaceutical executive with a background with large multinational companies like Abbott Laboratories. Dr. Graham is a true visionary, a serial entrepreneur who has 3 decades worth of leadership experience in pharmaceuticals, healthcare infrastructure development, and hospitality industry and finance. Her list of achievements is long, but suffices to say that she is a highly accomplished woman who has set a bar so high for all of us. Dr. Graham, welcome to Let's Talk About Health in Africa.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation.
Great. So let's start by diving into the geopolitics of access to medicines, the thing that everyone is talking about right now, the access to vaccines for COVID-19, and putting that into perspective, how that ties into this entire conversation of why Africa needs to manufacture vaccines and pharmaceuticals on the continent. So just looking at India, as the coronavirus crisis has spiraled out of control there, the Serum Institute of India, the world's largest vaccine maker, has said that they can no longer export Covishield vaccine from AstraZeneca, which it has been making for the world. And that's a problem for the most vulnerable people around the world, including those of Africa, because we are depending on the Serum Institute, on India as a source of those vaccines. And Serum Institute is particularly important because it's also supplying COVAX, which is the global mechanism that is responsible for supplying and distributing vaccines to the rest of the world. And at the moment, COVAX should have already delivered 170 million total doses, according to UNICEF, around the world. Instead, it has delivered just a fraction of that, 71 million shots to 125 countries. Most of those, 42%, are coming from the Serum Institute. 56% are from AstraZeneca. So very much depending on a very, on one country, on one manufacturer to supply vaccines to most of the world. And so what I would like to get from you is your reaction, whether you think mechanisms like COVAX could really ever work to deliver essential products, to have the weight of delivering something as important as this, as the coronavirus vaccine, to the rest of the world single-handedly.
One of the things, this has been like taking a look back and going back to when we tried to start up this company that we did. Because what is happening right now is the exact business case that we made. The business case we made for setting up a fully integrated pharmaceutical manufacturing facility in Africa was this. There was too much dependence on raw materials, on finished products from Asia. Initially, it was India, and then it was China. There was a lot of discussion. This was about the early 2000s, and I know I got into a number of arguments with my friends from the World Bank and IFC who said that there was enough global manufacturing going on around the world, and it was not necessary for Africa to have manufacturing. One of them, in many years later, had changed his mind after he visited us in Ghana. But the argument then was that it's a global playing field. You could sit here and get on the internet and you could source your raw materials and you could source your products. And they said it wasn't necessary. Well, here we are. Exactly what we predicted could happen did happen. It is very sad to see what is happening in India today, but I'm hoping that the leaders in Africa have their eyes open now to what can happen. You cannot blame India for keeping whatever they need to take care of themselves when something like this happens. The same way here in the United States, where we stopped sending things out, borders were closed and all sorts of other things. It is time for Africa to sit up and say, what are our priorities? Without health, what matters? And it's the same discussion when you look into healthcare, building of hospitals. Suddenly in Nigeria, where I come from, where at the slightest thing that goes wrong, you just get up, the elite get up and they go to the US, they go to Europe, to the hospitals. Suddenly everybody closed their borders and you couldn't go anywhere. And so they had to make do with the hospitals that we have there. If we don't fix those hospitals, how do we fix things? And it's the same thing with drug manufacturing. Um, this is not going to be the end of pandemics. One of the things I did recently, we just moved back to Chicago. From 2018, I was volunteering at the Outbreak exhibit at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And what we did at the Outbreak, it was set up about 5,000 square foot of space, given the history of pandemics, starting from the 1918 pandemic. And it was set up in 2018 to mark 100 years. And at that point in time, we were so sure, all scientists who were in that area felt very sure that the next pandemic was about to happen. And it did. And there will be others. So this is not of, oh, we're done with COVID, and so that's it. We can just relax. It's going to happen again. So what will happen? What do we do? That's the question. What are the next steps?
Absolutely. So we do have to think about the future because the threat of pandemics is ever present. They will continue to come. And of course, you're right that we cannot blame India for wanting to take care of its people. It's up to Africa to take steps to make sure that it secures the health of its people. And I'm hoping that what you're saying, that the closure caused by COVID, where leaders who are usually the elites who would usually fly to London, to New York to get healthcare, leaving their citizens to fend for themselves and underinvesting in health systems, will take another look at those decisions that they have been making not to invest in healthcare. Because if you have a closure like this again, they're going to be stuck with the same underfunded, underinvested health systems that they have been neglecting for a long time. So we are all keeping our fingers crossed. It's a game changer. But are you concerned when you look at the deadly spike in India that it is a precursor to what we might expect in Africa, given that the projections right now is that there isn't enough vaccine for the world and countries of Africa are likely to be able to get the surpluses from 2023. So that's in 2 years' time.
Well, I've been encouraged by, I recently was reading up on a document that showed what is happening in Africa now in terms of promoting the manufacture of vaccines and so on and so forth. And I urge you to see if you could get my dear friend Patrick Tipo of BioVac Institute to talk to you about what BioVac has been doing. I have actually visited them there, and I know they've been on this journey for a long time. Started off basically with just getting things and packaging them there, just putting the already manufactured vaccines and packaging it and going on. I've read that there is actually an agreement. I don't know how far it is. They had said March, but I haven't seen any update between Johnson and Johnson and Aspen Institute in South Africa to make the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, that's the one I took. It's a one shot. It works well against the variants that we have so far. So it is very encouraging. And to me, I see the manufacture of vaccines, if African leaders can get themselves together, being a little bit easier than people like me who went into making APIs. The reason is this. How are vaccines used? They are actually usually purchased by governments. If you don't have the vaccines to give your children measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, all of those vaccines, polio, where are we going? You would have a whole generation of kids growing up, dying, and so on. So it's governments, and I think most governments realize that it is their responsibility. What that does is that if you can ensure that a manufacturer knows that I will get my money, I have a clear mandate to supply XYZ vaccines and I will get paid. That's the important thing, because one of the things that African governments do is they place the order, they receive it, and they don't pay you on time. And in the case of Ghana, the currency is changing, it's getting, devalued. By the time you get your money, you've lost everything that you put in. So I think that the future for vaccines is actually a lot more rosy than most people would think. Yes, the technology may be a challenge, but what I would encourage would be more partnerships like what I just mentioned of Johnson and Johnson and Aspen. There are similar partnerships in Tunisia and other parts of Africa, in Morocco. We don't need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to this. There is a certain urgency required at this point. So we need to partner and we need to incentivize our partners. If you have insecurity in places like Nigeria right now, it's just incredible. How can anyone even go to invest there when the place is not secure? So the government has a lot to do in terms of ensuring security, incentivizing these folks. But this idea that we will start from scratch to start our own discovery of vaccines and new methods and so on, it's just too urgent a case for us to start doing that. In the future, yes, we'll get there. We'll get to where we make the active ingredients for the vaccines. But right now, let's embrace the new technology. Let us partner with these bigger companies that have done a lot to get there. That's what I would say.
Yes.
I think that that vaccine manufacturing it's not a myth. There are, about 10 manufacturers right now, I understand, on the African continent. The yellow fever vaccine has been made for decades in Senegal.
Yes.
It's not that it's not been done. So it's not such a big deal. We're less likely to have API manufacturing in Africa than we are to have vaccine manufacturing.
You're quite right. I think lots of interesting initiatives that are happening, partnerships like the Aspen Johnson & Johnson that you're talking about. And it's a good point that you make that we have to incentivize technology transfer, and of course partnering is the way forward rather than trying to go back to discovery. That's obviously not a practical solution when you are trying to build up and prepare for pandemics that are coming left, right and center. So the challenge, I think, what somebody said this very well at a recent African Union meeting where they were talking about vaccine manufacturing, that we cannot just hope that people will, out of goodwill, offer to transfer technology. You have to put incentives on the table to get people to actually help you with the know-how, because once you have the technology, you need the know-how, how to actually make. That's a really critical point to make. So you've been looking at issues of access for a long time. We will come to LaGray Chemicals in a moment and talk about that. But you went into manufacturing yourself because you saw a need. What would you say is the biggest argument right now why Africa needs to have manufacturing capabilities, not only for vaccines, for outbreak preparedness, but to meet the routine health needs of African populations, starting from the active ingredients like you were doing at LaGray Chemicals, and to making the finished pharmaceutical products themselves?
Well, COVID-19 has made it very clear that, hey, health security, you must have your own source of your raw materials, your drugs, and so on. I remember somebody showing me a picture of China when they had the lockdown. Everything was shut down completely. There were no planes flying. There was nothing. And even after they started opening up, there weren't, you know, materials coming in. So obviously, people were using up the stockpiles they had. India was still open until India now had this issue.
Yes.
The fear, of course, that we all have is that with what has happened in India, it could very well happen in any one of our countries in Africa. Any one of them could easily have that. So if people did not understand it before, because you could step out and you could get your penicillin or whatever from any store. I wasn't there in Africa, so I don't know. But I was there during the Ebola um, outbreak. And the advantage of having a manufacturing facility right there to be able to handle things. What we did, we already had a formulation for hand sanitizers when the Ebola outbreak came up. Nobody was making hand sanitizers in Ghana. Everyone had to start scrambling. We got our data out. We had it approved already in Ghana, but we hadn't done anything with it. We had some bottles. We quickly started making those hand sanitizers, and they were flying off the shelves. When the COVID started, I think part of the protocols in West Africa, at least I know, is that they're using azithromycin.
Yes.
I had calls from people reminding me, saying, where do we get it? Well, azithromycin happened to be one thing that we made. That's the active ingredient, as well as the finished dosage forms. And we did that basically as a proof of principle. It was a small little plant. It really wasn't that big. And why did we do it that way? Because that's what the market said. We conducted our market studies in split the fees 50-50 with the Africa Project Development Facility, which is a branch of the IFC based in Ghana. And interestingly, as they went around and they talked to manufacturers, because our original intent was go build a full-blown API manufacturing facility. Well, the results of the market study told us it's just not going to fly. You're not going to make the money. One particular manufacturer in Ghana, who was asked the question again many years later, said, if they make it and they sell it to me, even for $1 less than I will get it from India, I will still prefer to get it from India than to get from them. Very simple. There was no market. They felt that there was no need to buy from us. The best thing was to just buy from India and from China. So we built, just as proof of principle, to be able to show, first of all, there are no waste disposals for API manufacturing. We had to design our own processing plant for the waste and everything. We put this thing up. We did a little tech transfer from a company in India that we worked with. The key thing for us, and that's one thing that I will take away, the most positive thing I would say I can take away from our journey through that was actually getting young people and teaching them what this was all about, giving them the right thing to do, the quality, the everything. We didn't take people who had already worked in other facilities because they didn't have the training. And so we took them and we trained them. So this was just a proof of principle. Do people now realize, do those manufacturers who said, if LaGray makes it for $1 less, I will not buy from LaGray, do they now realize the importance of having a local manufacturer there that at the time when COVID hit and everywhere was shut down, if I had a local manufacturer that I could go to and I could say, give me my antibiotics, give paracetamol, I would say no, because that has to be done in ton quantities, right? But at least the small scale essential medicines could still be done. I wish I could ask that person again,
Yes.
what do you say now? Because if the local manufacturers themselves did not understand the importance of having a fellow manufacturer there making active pharmaceutical ingredients, how would the government understand it?
Yes.
You see, this is the thing. And that's why I said, vaccines, I see vaccines as being easier to implement than putting API manufacturing in. Okay. When you start doing the API manufacturing, where are the raw materials? We should have a thriving petroleum industry that should be able to give us all the solvents that we need for API manufacturing. Because at the end of the day, even though the API is the heart of the medicine, if you have the trained chemists and chemical engineers and so on, it's a pretty straightforward process. Yes, there is a move now from batch manufacturing, which is what used to be the case, to continuous manufacturing so that it's more efficient and you can make more and so on. But it's a pretty straightforward process. It's any organic chemist who has worked in the lab and knows how to mix the chemicals to make something can make active ingredients. So it's pretty straightforward.
Yes, you actually touched on my next question I was going to ask you on your entrepreneurial journey. You were the first vertically integrated pharmaceutical manufacturing company in West Africa, providing one of the most important pillars for a viable pharmaceutical industry, something that has really limited the development, the sustainable development of the local manufacturing industry. The fact that African manufacturers have to buy active pharmaceutical ingredients that they need from India, from Indian manufacturers with whom they are competing for the same market, which means that they cannot expect to get good value from a competitor who is giving you the ingredients you make to compete with their product. So what I was going to ask you was whether the support that LaGray received when you were making active ingredients in Ghana on the continent reflect the understanding of why that project was so critical, a stepping stone to a sustainable manufacturing industry, to implementing the pharmaceutical manufacturing business plan. Did you feel that the support, not only from your potential clients, other manufacturers in Ghana, on the continent, but also from the government of Ghana, did it reflect that understanding?
No, very simple, no. And I will illustrate that with, first of all, Ghana is unique in the sense that everything comes in from everywhere, from China, from India. They make a lot of money from taxes that are imposed on the imports, right? That's a source of revenue. And so as a group, as the pharmaceutical manufacturers, when we would go to talk to the Ministry of Finance, Minister of Finance, and so on, they would tell us, how do we get the money, So most manufacturers basically made their money from importing finished products. We had, after our first few years of working, we had to take in private equity partners. And initially, we had been talking to one of the development finance institutions, FMO, and we had come to over 2 years of going through that. Eventually, they decided to put it into a Tunisian private equity fund. And this company had invested in a Tunisian manufacturing company. And so it was attractive that they knew the industry because it's good to have people who understand. But they came in not understanding the difference between the Tunisian pharma industry and the Ghana pharma industry. And they got very frustrated within the first year, 2 years. But the difference was that in Tunisia, and today Tunisia is a country of what, about 10 million people, and they have about 40 pharmaceutical manufacturers. A lot of them are joint ventures with big pharma, with the Pfizers, GSKs, and so on. But the deal they struck with the government was this: if we can make the medicines that are needed in the country, the essential medicines, to the quality, to the international quality that is required, you will not import anything from India or China. Once there is enough supply, they even stop importing from Europe.
Yes.
Okay. So you can imagine the difficulty that the company they invested in had was only in the early stages whilst they were building and whilst they were doing their process development. But once they've got the new product approved, the government comes to inspect them once in a while to see that you have 6 months supply, security for the nation. If there's something happens, they need to be able to have it.
Yeah.
So compare that business model with, you now invest in a company in Ghana where the company is meeting certain international standards and is competing against the low quality things coming in from China. Some you don't even know what the quality is, coming in from China and India. Okay, an aggressive team of marketers that come in from these countries to come and sell and who offer all sorts of incentives. My sales and marketing team, they would always go everywhere and say, "Oh, Dr. Graham, she's stopping us from getting business because I would not." Just before I left, one came and said, "Hey, you know what? This Indian company is giving laptops to everybody who buys their products. So we need to give laptops. If they go to a hospital and they talk to the pharmacist, they have to come up with 15% of the contract right up front." Okay, and I would tell my staff anytime we did any GMP training, which was on a regular basis, and I said, if you take 15% and you give to this guy today, tomorrow your mother, your grandmother, your husband, your wife, your kid is going to go to that hospital where the person has taken maybe 25% from a company that you do not know what the quality is. So you are basically you're killing your family members. Yeah. That's one thing that you need to understand. That is what people do not understand about, when you talk about corruption in that kind of system. Yeah. You're affecting your own family.
Yes.
So it's okay if you have the wherewithal to just fly them out of the country, right? And take them. And probably that's why some people do that. Yeah. But if our selling product to a hospital, you have to, they are only going to give it to the person who gives them the highest amount of money in order to purchase. There's a big problem in that. And that is happening till today, I am sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I am not saying that there shouldn't be incentives. So the business that I do now, for example, is an example, okay? And this is the difference between what happens in developed world and the non-developed world. I work with banks who provide funding. They are not always able to identify companies that need funding, okay? So I work with them and I look for the people who need the funding. I prepare a package that goes to the bank to convince the bank that, hey, this hospital, hey, they've been going through a hard time, but here are their financials. This is what is happening. This is what they need, and so on and so forth. When that deal closes, I have a negotiated agreement with the bank, and the bank pays me a certain percentage.
Yes.
And for the Small Business Administration loans, which is the US federal government, when it is an SBA loan, there is a form that I fill out to say, this is how much time that I put into getting this package together.
Yes.
And the line item of how much I get either from the borrower or from the lender is written there, and I get compensated. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with somebody saying, I am going to go to the hospital to try and convince the hospital that this is the best product that is available. I will go with all the necessary things and so on and so forth. This is the time I have spent. I have transportation I went with, blah, blah, blah. Have a contract and have it written and let that person be paid compensation for doing that so that it's above board. And when you've paid that compensation at the end of the year, you file your taxes and you pay for it. You get the difference.
Yes.
When you put the health and welfare of your citizens and your own family at risk because of money, that's a major, major.
I think you're speaking to some very important issues here. Something that watching and listening to the conversations that are going on right now about how we move forward from this moment, from this pandemic, and prepare for the future. One thing that I have really wondered about is whether our leaders can actually walk the talk and do the things that are necessary, creating the business environment that is going to support businesses like LaGray that are working to secure the future, the health, access to health products during times such as this and beyond, right? I mean, what is interesting about what you're saying is the short-sightedness of the decision not to support a business like LaGray because a company coming from somewhere else is coming and giving you a very lucrative incentive to buy from them, but you fail to see or to think about what happens if the world shuts down like it has in this pandemic and people are not able to fly in products and you don't have active pharmaceutical ingredients in the country to be able to make your own finished pharmaceuticals. Because one thing that happened a lot during this pandemic is it's not only India that has banned exports. The US has done it, Italy, Germany, UK. We saw companies across the globe banning export of pharmaceuticals and people couldn't fly anywhere. And so there is a short-sightedness in making business decisions not to support a company that is establishing operations that are compliant with international standards of good manufacturing practice and making ingredients that you need to establish an industry that many of our governments talk about wanting to establish because they want to protect health security.
So what I was saying actually,
Yes.
not specifically government, no. What I'm saying is that this cuts across the entire, from the person at the bottom.
Yes.
It is not government only, it is everybody. And so when you asked me to talk, you said, how do we make this known to the average person on the street?
Yes.
That this is the problem we have.
Yes.
This is what we need to support as a people, because it is when the people are able to verbalize this to the government that the government will act. So there should be, the voices should be raised to say, we should not allow this to happen. And it should start from each one of us.
Yes.
It should start because we all need to take the right medicines. There are so many stories of people who go in and you're given an injection and they just die and nobody knows what it is. Or they've taken some medication and after several days it's just not working.
Yes.
Okay. Fortunately, by the time I left Ghana, one of the most adulterated things actually, funny enough, were the lifestyle drugs.
Right.
So you go in and you buy Cialis or Viagra somewhere and it doesn't work, they take it back. So that was a healthy, change.
Yes.
It was no longer worth doing it for paracetamol. so they moved to the higher end ones, and there was a lot of that. But there's a lot of this where government comes in is that there are different, and this is where the AU acting together is a very important thing. This is why the free trade zone coming up is one thing. Another part of it is the AMA. That is something that I support fully. But there are good things being done in different African countries.
Yes.
Okay? I've mentioned Tunisia as an example, right? In South Africa, companies get contracts to supply for X number of years.
Yes.
Okay? In Ghana, there's nothing like that. You don't have that assurance that I will be supplying, I have a contract for 10 million or whatever, which would allow you to take that to the bank and tell the bank, hey, I am signed up with the government and I am providing X number of pills or whatever over the next 5 years. So I am sure of this income coming in. So please give me working capital to use. They don't have that.
Yes.
Okay. There are good things being done in a number of in Nigeria. You can't set up a pharmaceutical company without a certain component of somebody locally who is involved, just to kind of protect. Whether that is good or not, I don't know. But there are things that the AU members can come together and share best practices. And just like we're talking about regulatory harmonization, right? Regulatory harmonization comes in to be sure that we're all seeing the same quality products from one country to the other. Okay? In the same way, there should be a harmonization of incentives that will allow for health security, because at the end of the day, health is security, is what we're talking about.
Yes.
If we have a pandemic, or if our kids are dying because we don't have vaccines, it is the security of our nation. If you take the United States of America, I know some people will say, oh, it's a country, but it's almost like it's like having 50 different countries. The AU is what, 55 countries? There can be harmonization of some of these things that will ensure that we can incentivize people to be able to manufacture, to maintain the quality, to do a number of other things.
Yes.
And so that is what I think, to a certain extent, I'm encouraged by the new things. I think I watched your interview with my sister Margaret and her update on what is going on with the AMA. It's very important that we have that, but we also have to have the support for the manufacturers as well.
Yes. Yes.
So I don't want to point fingers at any country and say this country is not doing this right or it's not doing that right. It's a question of they're coming together and sharing what is right. I know that there are certain countries, when I was there and I did some consulting work with WAHO, the West African Health Organization. I do know that a number of the Francophone countries do not want to have manufacturing in their countries. They are not interested. Hey, it's okay. It's okay. The only problem I had is they just wanted to get things from France. But it's okay if we have certain centers. Ghana is interested in doing it. Nigeria is, a number of other countries in Kenya, in East Africa, and so on, who will be able to manufacture enough to go around. Same thing for vaccines.
Yes.
If we just take all four corners of Africa and ensure that in each place we have a large center that make vaccines here, make APIs here, whatever it is, pull the resources together so that we can grow the industry. And it's possible. It really is. I don't think there is anything that is not possible. I always say there's nothing like impossible in my dictionary. When we were hiring at LaGray, everybody used to wonder. There was a sentence I put in anything we put in any job that we put out there. We said that anybody applying for a job at LaGray must have a can-do attitude. Don't come in and tell me it can't be done, or no, this is standing in the way, or that is standing in the way. So that's my attitude. Africa has the potential to have a thriving pharmaceutical industry. It just takes cooperation amongst the different entities. We're seeing nationalism is going to come up when anything like this happens, everybody's going to feel like I have to protect my own citizen. So we need to be sure that we protect Africa as a whole.
Well, hopefully, the fact that now everybody's united in not being able to protect their citizens, sharing the same fate of not getting vaccines, that ought to be a strong enough incentive to motivate countries to work together. And we're seeing progress. The African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization, which was established in 2009, according to Margaret, who's leading that initiative, within 6 months, we could see an African Medicines Agency in operation, that treaty being ratified by the number of countries that is needed to bring it into effect. And so we are seeing a number of regulatory authorities, Ghana FDA and TFDA, Tanzanian FDA, acquiring higher level of maturity as regulatory agency. So how much of a game changer do you see those developments, the coming into effect of the African Medicines Agency, maturity of regulatory agencies? How much will it be a game changer towards establishing a viable manufacturing capacity for vaccines and pharmaceuticals?
These are major developments. You missed one thing, and that is the Africa trade. What do you call it?
Yes, Africa Continental
Very
Free
important.
Trade Area.
At the end of the day,
yes,
there are three things in play here. One is the quality of the medicines, right? The other is registration of things. When we started out, we register in Ghana, you get that first, then we had to start registering in every other country in West Africa, because we set up originally naively, I guess, living here in the US, and you read these things, you think that they're just about to happen, right? Yeah, they said, oh, ECOWAS free trade and so on and so forth. And so naively we thought, I am from Nigeria, and naturally you would expect that I would want to build this facility in Nigeria. But, we looked at it and said, oh, Ghana seems to be a lot more welcoming. My husband is from there. It looks like it's easier to set it up there. But it would be so easy to just sell to Nigeria and to other places. Well, it doesn't work that way, because you now have to go through all the different registrations. Our investors, private equity partners, got frustrated, I told you, by the second year of coming in, and they said, stop everything. We don't want you registering anywhere. We want you to focus on the Ghanaian market. Big mistake, but that was what they thought. So two things there, the market, we've got the quality with the AMA, we've got the regulatory harmonization, which allows you to now put in just one dossier, and that region, they look at it, and you can now apply for marketing authorization in an entire region. Then the African trade, what do they call it now? I can't remember what it's called. But you now have an expanded market size. Yes. And that is what really matters. It is, how can I sell? How can I make the money? You can't build high quality thing like LaGray in Ghana and say that you're only serving the Ghanaian market. It doesn't make any sense. That was never our intent. Never was. And so without that, those three items, they are all part of that stool, for three-legged stool for the manufacturer. One, you've got a strong regulatory. What does that do? A strong regulatory authority trying to get all the regulations. You now see that what happened in India when in the early 2000s, they decided to start closing down all the manufacturers that didn't meet a certain quality, right? Yes. Everybody has to start setting up and upgrading their facilities and so on and so forth. Because if you look at us at the time, who were to come out and make a capsule of azithromycin, our cost for making it is 20, 50 times more than our neighbor down the road, who does not have air handling units, does not have a chiller, does not have to carry all those high electricity burden and so on. You put down what our cost is significantly more. And then you want me you've manufactured at this high cost because of the high cost of utilities and so on. And if you don't have the volumes and so on, you're coming out at a higher cost out of the door. And you have to compete with the person next door who just has louvered windows somewhere, does not have any kind of quality. You
Yes.
have to equalize it. You've got to weed out all the companies that do not meet those standards so
Yes.
that there's a level playing field. Because what is
Yes.
happening right now is that there isn't a level playing field. So all those things are very, very important. They are major, major developments I see. I have been following the AMA and the AMRH very closely. When I was at USAID, I kept talking about it and I kept trying to encourage them to support and so on, which has been done. But these are very important developments, and it is something that manufacturers had been asking for, at least a number of them. So it's good news. It's wonderful news, I think.
Excellent. I think even beyond making sure that the medicines that are coming onto those markets are of good quality, they work as they should. The other thing I think that is also important, just to add to your excellent arguments, is that at this time when African countries are trying to attract technology partners, those things really do make a big difference. How well equipped the regulatory agencies are for partners who may wish to work with manufacturers on the African continent, the Johnson and Johnson's versus Aspen type partnerships. So that's quite critical.
If you look at the history of API manufacturing and other things here in the US, everything started shifting. When I worked at Abbott making APIs,
Yes.
it was too expensive for us to make an API from start to finish.
Yes.
It just didn't make any sense. So what we actively did was go to India to look for companies that we could work with, right? And help them to upgrade their facilities. Eventually, we would make things that are, assuming you have a long chain of molecules, right?
Yes.
You divide it into three pieces and you give one piece here, another piece there, and then the three pieces are put together here.
Yes.
That's the last two steps are done here. And one of the drugs I was working on, at the time that we started working with the Indian manufacturer that we gave it to, it was costing about $50,000 a kilo. Okay. We
Wow.
were able to, in a matter of a year and a half, with working with this manufacturer and assisting the manufacturer in getting inspected by the FDA for when they're doing something that really is very close to the final step. Got it down to about $5,000 a kilo.
Wow.
And those refinements continue as they go along. This is not for a drug that was approved yet.
Yes.
This is just during the process development. Okay?
Yes.
So those are things and eventually what now happened was India found out that it was cheaper to even make things in China. So Indians started investing in Chinese companies.
Yes.
The US companies got wise. And there's a little place outside of Shanghai. If you go there,
Yes.
it's just US companies who are making their APIs there. It's not Chinese companies. So, and when Africans go ahead to purchase, they're not purchasing those. Those are being set up by American companies to manufacture the APIs that are used here because it is cheaper to do that. So what has now happened is that there is a major concern, and I'd like to kind of segue into saying that what we are talking about African problems, it's the same worldwide.
Yes.
It is the same concern that we have here in the US now, especially with COVID. There has been a big outcry, a worry about health security. A huge amount of money was given to a company last year. The goal for that company is to revive API manufacturing in the US.
Right.
Because it has stopped. And so the question was, what happens if we have another pandemic? There was an inward looking at, now we have sourced everything out, everything is offshore. We're
Yes.
making everything out in China, in India. If they shut their doors, what happens? Okay. What happened? I ran into a document a few days ago, and I will share that with you later on.
Thank you.
And
Yes.
it's entitled A Blueprint for Enhancing the Security of the U.S. Pharmaceutical Supply Chain.
Right.
And as I read it, I couldn't help but chuckle because everything that was written in there is exactly what African manufacturers have been talking about for years. It's the same thing. Some of it in Africa has already been done. So they start off by saying that there should be a list of essential medicines
Yes.
and an identification of high priority essential medicines. The essential medicine list has been there from WHO for ages.
Yes.
And every African country I know, either they adopt the WHO list completely or they take the WHO list and they modify it.
Yes.
And then it is reviewed either annually or every 2 years.
Yes.
Okay? This is the manufacturers of generic medicines here in the US. So they say, do that. And then they talk about incentives that are needed, right? That the US government needs to incentivize expanded and new investments by generic manufacturers. They want the government to give them a long-term price and volume guaranteed contracts.
Right.
Remember I talked about South Africa,
Yes.
right? That is key. You must have long-term price, a fixed price that you know, because that's the only way you can plan.
Absolutely.
Okay? So these are things that we have been talking about in Africa. When I was there, that's what we talked about. Long-term price, volumes, guarantee. And then they talk about grants, and I'm going to go into a little bit more about grants, but provide grants to support construction, alteration or renovation of facilities for US-based manufacture of these priority medicines, which have been listed, right?
Yes.
And give more grants for manufacturers to relocate their production. And we're now talking of those whose production facilities were moved to India and to China. And so they want grants, incentives to move that manufacturing back to the US.
Yes.
Okay? Then they want tax incentives. And we talked about tax incentives and nobody ever could. Said, when I told you we would meet with the Minister of Finance and these were successive governments, and they would say, what do you have to offer me to make up for the import duties that we are getting, which is a revenue, import duties for the pharmaceuticals that are coming in.
Yes.
And when we try to explain that, listen, you have to give priority to local manufacturing.
Yes.
Okay. I remember I used to talk to the Minister of Trade in one of the other ones and said, you have an incentive for exports.
Yes.
Where if you have 70% of exports, you get some tax breaks, right? I said, it's difficult to say that a pharmaceutical manufacturer should be in a free, export trade zone or something, which had certain benefits, and impose the same 70%. You should reverse it.
Yes.
Because it is important for our security, health security, that we keep 70% for the country.
Yes.
You know, and export 30% at least, and get those incentives, you know, but they don't understand that. So tax incentives, they're asking for tax incentives for relocating the foreign manufacturing back, tax incentives for repurposing of existing production lines. They're asking for a 50% tax credit to offset the cost of manufacturing medications on the priority medicines list, an increase in the R&D tax credit to 20%, and an assurance that grants that are provided will not be considered taxable income. In fact, in other words, give me a grant, but don't tax me on that. And then they also talk about regulatory efficiencies. Again, you cannot talk about medicines and quality without talking about regulatory efficiencies. To have the FDA work with and this is one of the things that there's always difficulties in a number of countries. The regulators in Africa feel like, no, there shouldn't be a discussion with manufacturers. But it's a partnership here. And that's what it should be. It should be a partnership between regulators and the industry. And that's what they're asking for. And this was published in 2020 at the start of the pandemic.
Yes.
Okay? And in 2021, they have come up with an addendum where they are asking for African manufacturers will really chuckle at this. They're asking for a tax credit for expenses related to bioequivalence studies. Okay? There was so much talk about bioequivalence studies, bioequivalence. We need to build facilities for bioequivalence. We need to do this. And we talked about assistance. This is a mature pharmaceutical industry in the United States is making these demands of government. They're asking for tax credit for initial and recurring FDA fees, okay? And a 25% reduction in the tax rate for US manufactured medicines on the essential medicine list. So we're not that far off, okay? This is an opportunity for us to leapfrog. One of the things I mentioned when I said it's going to be more difficult to actually establish all the API manufacturing, but it could happen. But what I would advise is that we shouldn't go back to the old ways of batch manufacturing, which is what we were doing, what is being done for most generic medicines. The way to compete is to go with the latest. If we are going to start API manufacturing, let us invest in continuous manufacturing.
Yes.
Partner with whoever we need to partner with. GSK is on the continent. GSK does do some continuous manufacturing. Partner. I've had colleagues, colleague manufacturers in Ghana who were totally against partnership. They wanted it to, keep it within the family and just let everything. I don't believe in that. We partnered with Sanders. We tried to work with GSK. With Sanders, we were able to even create a program where, because it was difficult to get workers, right?
Yes.
So we partnered with them so that we could train people with the electrical engineering and so on. Not graduates now. We're talking about, just after high school.
Yes.
To train them on pharmaceutical manufacturing so that they know the right thing to do. So we need to speak more about partner, and the partnering can be between African manufacturers and others. It could also be with governments as well. Yes. Definitely for vaccines, government has to be involved. I believe
absolutely. Yes.
Government has to secure that, but it's a bit different with the others.
Absolutely. I think really important points that you're speaking to, having off-take agreements that guarantees actually a market for those things that companies make once they have invested the money to make those products. Partnering, I think we're seeing this even in big pharma, the partnerships that are happening. I think Sanofi is making the vaccine for, I think, Pfizer, I believe. There are all kinds of partnerships that are happening to try to encourage that. And I think it's a really, really interesting point that you made about what you did at Abbott to make the production of APIs, the active ingredients, more affordable for you in the US as a multinational company by going to partner with Indian companies and splitting up the process and giving it to different companies. All of these are models, I think, that African countries and African governments, in their aspiration to establish a viable pharmaceutical industry, could be looking at in terms of how they divide that labor across the continent and putting in place the foundation. But what worries you? You talked a lot about some of the inconsistencies and the challenges that you experienced trying to establish a sustainable active ingredient business in Ghana. You're listening to African governments right now. There is a lot of political momentum. We are going to do this. We're going to go and make vaccines and become self-reliant. When you listen to those conversations, what worries you about the way they are looking at this, and what do they need to get right?
What worries me is that the pandemic is already fading away and it's going to be over and that's it, and nothing is going to happen. That bothers me. There's a lot of talk. They're saying the same things that they said 10 years ago. We've been here before.
Yes.
And nothing has moved forward. I was very encouraged a couple of years ago. Someone at HHS got in touch with me and said, hey, you know what, Merck is setting up a vaccine facility in Ghana. I'm not sure that has happened. It's been like 3 years or something. Um, I don't know what's happened with that, but there is a lot of, and believe me, I think that that is just inherent with governments everywhere.
Yes.
Because in the 2 years that I work with the US government, they're very slow. Okay. Yes, when a pandemic happens like this, everybody puts their hands on deck. But
Yes.
when it comes to making change, it's a little bit at a time. And the biggest worry I have, and I have seen with African governments, and it's particularly in Ghana, is that one government starts something, a political party that is in government starts something, and once they leave, the next one comes in and it's stopped. So there is no continuity. There isn't a plan that you say, we've been talking about this pharmaceutical manufacturing plan for Africa for ages now.
Yes.
There isn't a plan that you can see this has been adopted and that this government is going to see follow it through for the next 20 years.
Yes.
Because it will only last as long as the 4 years that that particular government that adopted it
yes.
has done it. That's what I've seen. So that bothers me. I have seen a lot of investments though in South Africa. South Africa has invested quite a bit in, technology, in all sorts of things. And that's why I say that they should come together, as the African Union and look at who's good in this, who's good in that, come up with a plan that is a universal plan for the continent.
Yes.
And implement it. Let each government take what they feel, this is the one I want to promote, and go with it, but take a plan. So that bothers me more than anything else. And the other thing is, of course, the investment in healthcare has just not happened. Yes. The investment in R&D has just not happened. I'm no longer begging for the R&D. R&D, what was it? They said 1% or so they should invest. Nothing has happened. It's just not there. So we keep playing catch up, and we can never catch up if we continue the way we're going. There are certain things, I have to tell you this, because of all the work that was done I remember sitting at meetings that I had when I was working with HIV at PEPFAR, and there were a lot of developments that were done that are being used today with the COVID. The telemedicine and all of those things that the US never wanted to even think about was being implemented as helping other nations, developing nations, India, Kenya, whatever. You got doctors, you could get surgeries done, wearable things where you could look at, get your blood pressure and everything, and it goes to the doctor and the doctor sees it and so on. A lot of that work was developed as part of helping the developed nations. And so all that needed to be done was COVID hit and they pulled it up, and we now see, hey, everybody's on Zoom, people are doing all sorts, doctors here. My daughter is an orthopedic surgeon. I tell her, how are you going to cut up the bones? But she still sees her patients on some of these platforms that they have. So there's a lot that has been done, especially with the youth that we have that are so much into IT and so on. We need to harness all of that, because you can't talk of healthcare now without talking about our IT infrastructure. It's very important. Counterfeit medicines, how to combat them. We don't even want to go there, but that is a major part of wanting to have our manufacturing done in Africa, is to try and help with that counterfeiting. That is a big deal.
Yes, really very, very critical, all of those aspects. Let's talk about money. You are the president of LaGray Finance, a diversified commercial finance company providing financial solutions to enterprises of all sizes in the healthcare sector and beyond. And when you were actually running your own manufacturing company, you raised millions of dollars for that project. So do you have any specific recommendations for African governments as they think about taking that leap from that aspiration to actually implementing the Africa Pharmaceutical Business Manufacturing Plan and some of the things they could think about in terms of securing the funding that they need to have adequate investment?
One of the things that really surprised me when I started my fellowship at USAID was the amount of money that the US government actually puts into basic research, into medicines.
Yes.
You see things that come out and you think, oh, it's the company that did it. A lot of it starts right from NIH, where grants are given to academia and so on. What is the story of Moderna and the mRNA vaccine? Moderna got about $1 billion from an entity called the Biomedical and Research Development Authority. This authority is one of the newest agencies in the US government. It was created soon after the anthrax. I don't know if you remember, in 2001, somebody was mailing anthrax out. And it suddenly dawned on them that, hey, wait a minute, we just had, this was in October of 2001, 9/11 had just happened. That was a plane going into a plane, a physical thing, right? What if our enemies were to weaponize anthrax? What happens?
Yes.
Okay. Fortunately, they could find out, you can get Cipro and take it and so on and so forth. So they started thinking of, we need to protect the US in every way possible. And so this small agency was set up. And it was set up as initially as what you would call a venture capital firm. It was meant to be run as the government gives it money, and this entity would now look for companies that they would invest in. Now, NIH and all of those and the NSF and all are investing in basic research. USAID and the State Department and all invest in things for HIV and all of those other things, right? That's different. Those are early stage. What they're now looking for are mature projects that are about ready to go to the FDA. Okay. And so they give a grant and then they partner, just like a venture capital firm. They now hire experts from industry, from everywhere, who sit with, once they have identified that this company is one that is doing something that is useful for us, we will work with them. We will not only give them money to complete this, we will get people from the FDA to work with them. We will hold their hands until it gets approved. And that's exactly what happened with Moderna. So they had the issue with Ebola. Remember, Ebola came into the US, and then there was Zika. This same organization handled all of that. The fear with Ebola was somebody ended up in Dallas who had Ebola. So money is put in by the government. In many cases, it may not come to anything. So there will be a number of investments that will not mature, will not go to market, but there are a lot more. And so that's how we have these mRNA vaccines today. It was government that invested in the basic research at the NIH. It is government that put in $1 billion into Moderna. It's government that has put money into so many things, right down to hand sanitizers and diagnostics and so on. If you go to the BARDA website, you can see all the things that they've, right now, since 2006, when it was set up, they've done, over 50 products that have been approved that are necessary. That if there is, this was a trial for them, this COVID-19.
Yes.
We all know that there will be other pandemics. I mean, realistically, anybody in the public healthcare field knows that this has just come to test us, and it shows us, and we should be ready for the next one.
It's a very interesting story. And incidentally, the other day I was listening to Dr. Rockbright, I think, who is the former CEO of BARDA. Yeah. And he was talking about this ambition that African countries have to establish vaccine manufacturing, and saying that it can be done because BARDA has actually done it before. It took them 10 years to establish egg-based vaccine manufacturing capacity in low and middle income countries with the H1N1 pandemic.
I'm going to frame my comments based on my experience in leading a global program while I was in BARDA collaborating with the WHO, where we actually did this. We expanded influenza vaccine manufacturing capacity in 13 lower and middle income countries. And we did that in a period of 10 years, but that was based on building influenza manufacturing capacity in eggs, and including building chicken farms to lay the eggs and all the complexity of the capacity needed to make egg-based influenza vaccines.
And they recognize the importance of local manufacturing capacity from that experience.
Yeah.
And so we know the critical need to have local and regional vaccine manufacturing capacity. And that was the premise of this program that we launched back in 2006 across 13 developing countries.
So really, this has been done before. What Africa is trying to do, it has been done before, and that it can be done again. Another exciting thing, I think, is that Moderna CEO was saying that they're actually interested in the possibility of building a plant in Africa and exploring how they could make vaccines for yellow fever, chikungunya, dengue, and Zika, and how they could actually partner in Africa.
I've been having meetings in the last few months with my team and different leaders to figure out, is there a framework to build a plant in Africa, a Moderna plant? That's something very much of interest to us, because we think first, COVID is not going to go away, unfortunately. We believe this virus is going to stay with humans and we have to learn to live with it. I think over time, when variants are going to stabilize with less people naive to the virus, it's going to be like over endemic situation. But there are many viruses that we are very interested in helping. Yellow fever, chikungunya, dengue, Zika. And so I really think the world would be a better place if we could find a way to bridge with COVID in the next 12 to 18, 24 months with existing manufacturing infrastructure. And then how do we build something in Africa that is there based on Africa soil, where we train people locally.
So I think there are a lot of possibilities here.
Remember that they've never had a drug before. This is their first one.
Their first, yes. It's a startup, right? Yeah.
It's a startup. So there is absolutely no reason why there cannot be a startup in Africa that would partner with any one of these companies and bring this technology. Absolutely not. So I think that the future for vaccines is actually bright. I believe that it'll work. Do we have the time now? I guess, well, if the Johnson & Johnson partnership with Aspen works, that would be a great one, So that's a good start. You asked about what is discouraging. What really discourages me quite a bit sometimes is, I talk about the can-do attitude. It's this feeling of, if we can't do it, we'll just go beg for, developed country, and we get all worked up and say they need to share with us, and
yes.
And so on and so forth. Yes, that sharing will happen only after we've taken care of ourselves. I mean, that charity begins at home.
Yes.
That's just the way it is, with what is happening in India. And the funny thing is that even India also was moving some manufacturing to China. I do have a friend who, he has companies in India, and he invested in companies in China as well.
Yes.
So it's that whole thing of, it's a global playing field. You can get anything you want anywhere. I think COVID has come to let everybody know that, yeah, that may be true, but you still need to have certain things at home.
Absolutely. Now, that's a case well made, I think, by the COVID pandemic, and hopefully people will not just fall back into the same patterns once the pandemic is out of our sight. We just fall back into the usual patterns, because like you say, it will not change. I mean, this is a pattern that has repeated itself again and again, and I think if African countries don't plan, look ahead, and actually take active measures to get this done, it will just continue like this, and they will continue to complain, and the pattern goes on. So 3 things, Dr. Graham, that you could leave us with, that you say, if they have to get something right, it has to be these 3 things. What would those be?
Actually, we've already mentioned those three things.
Yes.
And I'm very encouraged at those three things that are happening. And that is the regulatory harmonization, the
Yes.
formation of the African Medicines Association, and the free trade zone across Africa. Those three things are key, right? Once we've got those, then I gave you a laundry list of what even the US Generic Medicines Association is asking for.
Yes.
It's the same thing that we're asking. Tax breaks, incentives,
yes.
you know. And the other thing, of course, is that the insecurity, something needs to be done about it. Because, you know, I'm sitting here and I'm worried about my family in Nigeria. I don't know what's happening. How can anybody go in to partner with any company there when one is not sure of your security?
Yes.
And it's not just Nigeria. There's so many places that we have those issues with. So we need to, first of all, have a peaceful Africa.
Yes.
Where there is no strife. That's the first thing.
Yes.
When this most recent Ebola came up in 2018, I was just finishing my stint there when it came up, and it was so difficult. Every day, my colleagues were going there and back and so on. But Ebola now happened in a war zone.
Yes.
Okay, that created so much problems. I mean, it took a long time for it to be cleared, but you get so worried about the colleagues who have gone there. At that time, where they had started trying the vaccine, so
yes.
that was a good development that there was a vaccine. But the worry of, oh my God, you know, here it is when a war zone is just on the border. They didn't know whether things would move from DRC to Rwanda and to other places and so on. So once there's no peace, everything else we're talking about now, it just pales in comparison if we don't have peace.
Yes, it makes sense. So the African Union really needs to be taking a long, hard look at the security situation across the continent and putting their heads together, how to create that business environment that is going to help them to realize the benefits of the Africa Free Trade Continental Area and, you know, all of these structures that they have created that have set them up properly for establishing a viable pharmaceutical industry.
And so many countries have been reliant on aid, for example, with HIV/AIDS.
Yes.
And before I left my fellowship, one of the things that we were talking about at the time, and Debbie Burks was in charge of PEPFAR at that time, was the number of countries that are about to get to that 90. And so when we pull out, what happens?
Yes.
What happens? That self-sufficiency needs to be there. After spending decades fighting HIV, if you pull out and then the country doesn't have the means of carrying on those programs, then we're back to square one. So those are things that the governments need to think about. Sustainability. How do we, and this all plays into it, the sustainable source of pharmaceuticals to take care of your people, of vaccines to ensure that your kids live to be the next generation. Because without those basic vaccines, look at what happens. The kids are just going to die. So we need to look at sustainability, and in order to do that, you have to look at health security. And health security is not just the hospitals, but it is your basic pharmaceuticals, essential medicines, and so on. And not running off to go to a hospital in the UK and hospital in Germany. I mean, I just hope that, the pandemic has stopped all of that and that it will not continue now that it seems like things are opening up.
Well, as African citizens, we are hoping that they will not be allowed in. They get kicked right back and go to the same clinics that we are going to as well.
At the end of the day, it's money, though. So if somebody shows up in the hospital, I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
It's all financial.
Yes.
It's all financial at the end of the day.
That is true. It's been a wonderful conversation, Dr. Graham. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I think we can leave it there. We've taken so much of your time, but we can speak again in the future, I think, and continue this conversation.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for all that you're doing. is important to get the message out there and let people know. And if there's anything I can do, just let me know.
Thank you. Great. I will email you. Thank you so much, Dr. Alexandra Graham, the president of LaGray Finance. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast.
Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you. Bye-bye.